Hail and well met, Slayers of Giants. I know a lot of you came here through the Brickgate saga. Welcome. There's a big hint about the progress of our case at the end of this chapter, if you're patient. If you're just joining us for this novel for the first time, you're in for a trip. A short recap. The story starts when the fictional character, Benjamin, has a break with reality because he's been so beaten down by, among other things, being left destitute after the theft of his life savings by a corporation called Megacorp. He invents a Don Quixote-esque character who is traveling around righting wrongs. Only unlike Don Quixote, who's crazy, Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi of Barcelona is sane and correct about living in a world of hidden magic. And he's come to the United States to figure out why this land is cursed. Rolando has taken on a squire, Serge Sanchez, and then Serge was knighted by the goddess of Lake Erie, so he's now Sir Sanchez of the town of Eels, guardian of justice and protector of mermaids. And he's got a familiar, like Rolando, only Rolando's is a raven, and Serge's familiar is a red panda. They befriended a woman named Cali on their journey, who turned out to be a Selkie mermaid hybrid, and she reappeared with Sir Steezel and his familiar, the billy goat Reckless Ken, to rescue Rolando and Serge from a group of monsters. The four knights and their three familiars traveled to Chicago to attend a meeting of the spirits of the Great Lakes, and Cali was knighted Dame Cali, the lion-hearted of Santa Leon, defender of the underestimated. The spirits told them to come back to Portland and get armor for Serge and Cali at an office just down the street from where Benjamin, the character, lives, at the headquarters of the Under Armour Corporation. There they met an orc who ran a forge on the roof of the building, and he made magical armor for Serge and Cali. And that's where we left off last week. Before I begin reading Chapter 25, thank you all for the overwhelming support as we battle a corporation that made it clear they want to make our life shit. Whether you're a commenter, a GoFundMe donor, or a person who told a friend, hey, have you heard about this Brickgate thing? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And a special thanks to Duncan Wilson, the sponsor of this week's show and the author of the short story collection 24 Seconds. More on that book later. Okay, back to our story. And as I remind everyone each week, this is just a draft. It can still be changed before it gets compiled into a novel you'll be able to hold in your hands. If you notice anything, a typo in the text on my Patreon or Substack, a continuity error, a huge structural change that you'd recommend, I appreciate any and all feedback, even if I don't always agree with it. So put that in the comments wherever you're finding this, and I'll wrangle all those notes into my document that I use as I edit the final version. Oh, and for those of you watching this on video or listening to the podcast version, I apologize in advance for my terrible British accent. I know it's bad. It's bad. Here's Brick by Brick, Chapter 25, The Witch in the Woods. Now that Serge and Cali had donned their magical armor, the next step in the plan, laid out for them by the spirits of the Great Lakes, was to return to their part of the country, specifically to the state of Michigan, more specifically to the Upper Peninsula, even more specifically to the small island off its northern coast, which was famous for not allowing any cars. Tourists visited Mackinac Island specifically because of this feature, and because of the Victorian architecture, horse-drawn carriages, and world-famous fudge, all of which were connected to this unusual automobile prohibition to varying degrees. The knights errant, with their swords stowed in their bags and passed through security using glamours that made them invisible to the TSA agents, flew into Detroit, rented a car, assumed their new seating arrangement, Serge driving, Cali in the front seat, Sir Steezel and Lord Rolando in the back, Gorman the red panda between them, Poe the raven on the central console, and Reckless Ken the billy goat riding on top of the roof, and drove to Mackinac City on the lower peninsula side, then to the ferry to Mackinac Island. From there, they walked. The ferry docked next to the Pink Pony Grill and across from the famous Original Murdoch's Fudge Candy Shop, and though the knights were eager to make their way to the house of the witch they'd been sent to find, and thus didn't want to stop for a full sit-down meal, they made time to grab some little bags of fudge for the road. The walk around the eastern quarter of the island would take them 49 minutes to the tranquil bluff overlook, from which they would turn inland into the woods. And Cali was amused to find the map program on her phone offered them good directions for this hike, and simply removed the drive option entirely. They paused for a bit to enjoy the view from the overlook, found it simultaneously serene and underwhelming when compared to vistas from higher cliffs over waves crashing on rocks far below. They would never breathe a word of that to Lord Gigon, the spirit of Lake Huron, but his lake, despite its enormous size, couldn't generate the kind of tidal activity or waves found on the Atlantic or Pacific, so staring out to the horizon over something so tranquil felt more meditative than exciting. Also, they wanted to wait for a few of their fellow hikers to wander off, or at least look the other way, before the four of them went off the trail and into the woods. Serge and Cali didn't quite know how the normal human's proclivity to avoid seeing magic worked exactly. When the four knights had walked out onto the surface of Lake Michigan back in Chicago, they'd stood in clear sight of the tourists on Navy Pier, and not one person had shouted, "Look, there's four Jesuses just walking out on the water down there." But Lord Rolando and Sir Steezel made some effort to conceal their use of magic from human witnesses when possible. The younger knights didn't know that this habit wasn't born of worry they would rouse suspicions, but out of a kind of efficiency. Both men reserved their feats of knight-errantry for the attentions of those who would write the tales of lore, which would bring them the most renown, glory for Lord Rolando's beloved Lady Nuria of Barcelona, and attention to Sir Steezel's prowess at solving unsolvable conundrums. Conundra? This was a puzzle he had not yet solved, so they avoided revealing themselves to normal people almost without thinking about it. A few of their fellow tourists did notice the strangely dressed foursome wander off the trail a little way north of the overlook, not because the group seemed magical in any way, but because the tourists wondered if they themselves were missing out on some portion of the island they ought to explore. Had they followed, the woods there would have turned them back quickly in a number of ways. The first layer of defense was, or at least seemed, completely natural. A few feet off the trail, and any wayward tourist would have run into a veritable wall of a local species of thorny plants known as greenbriers. Most of the knights were hesitant to get their swords dirty and possibly dulled on the woody vines, but Rolando offered, knowing his magical sword, Macawabide, would never dull or break. He twisted the head of the cane to reveal the blade, and then began swinging the sword in careful downward strokes, carving a tunnel through the vines. He didn't say so, but the other knights could tell he thoroughly enjoyed this exercise, and because of his magical augmentations, his accelerated speed and delayed aging, he barely broke a sweat, or at least no more than he would have simply walking around in the late July Midwest humidity. And then, quite suddenly, the four knights broke through the barrier of briars into a portion of the woods where tall trees kept them in shadow, with only the occasional twinkle of bright sunlight peeking through to let them know it was still mid-afternoon. The sudden absence of greenbriers revealed the unnatural nature of the woods, but the trees looked normal. They were dense enough to prevent the knights from walking in a straight line to the west as required by Lady Ariel Honan's directions, but with some serpentine paths through the trees, they felt they were staying roughly on track. At first. These slight diversions to the right or left to get around trees soon became disorienting. "Are we still?" Serge asked. "I believe we are keeping to the path," Rolando said. "But I am less than certain." "No, I don't think we are," Sir Steezel said. "I can't be sure." He stopped and turned back. Cali stopped also, then looked around. "Did you guys notice that?" "What?" Serge asked. "The trees. They weren't moving. But then when we stopped, they stopped." "But if they weren't moving," Sir Steezel started. "Is anyone else hungry?" Cali asked. Serge looked at his watch. "How long have we been walking?" Rolando frowned. "I do not think it was so long, but the light is fading. Is the sun setting?" Cali pulled a little bag of fudge out of her backpack. "Does anyone want a snack? Some fudge?" "It is getting dark fast," Serge said. "The sun sets on the far side of the island, right? So maybe there's like a hill or mountain or—" "No, the highest point is only 320 feet above the lake," Cali said. But it was difficult to make out her words clearly, because she'd stuffed 2 pieces of fudge in her mouth. "Hey, can I have a piece of that before you finish it all?" Serge asked. "Perhaps we should ration it a bit, Dame Cali," Rolando said. "I fear we might be somewhat lost." "No!" Sir Steezel shouted. Cali was pulling the bag of fudge away from Serge. He reached for it, and the glint in his eye had lost its humor. Sir Steezel drew his sword so fast Rolando could only click the trigger on the head of his cane and begin to twist before Sir Steezel swung his bastard blade in an upward arc between Serge and Cali, catching the paper bag just beneath Cali's fingers and leaving her pinching a bit of waxed paper. The remaining fudge fell on the ground, and Cali and Serge both lunged for it. "Wait!" Sir Stiesel cried, pushing his way between them and shouldering them both away. As they were knocked aside, both reached for the hilts of their swords, Serge's in his duffel bag and Cali's in the pocket of her cargo pants. But as they drew them, they kept their eyes fixed on the pieces of chocolate on the ground. As they watched, the roots of the trees formed the shapes of skeletal hands and pulled the chocolate into the moist earth. "Hey, that's mine!" Cali cried. Serge had pulled his sword and swung down at the roots. He chopped off one of the hands, and it fell motionless, then twitched, then clawed its way into the soil and disappeared. "Come back here!" he bellowed, and raised his sword again. Sir Stiesel took a step away from them, then crouched down so the tip of his blade touched the ground, and he did a quick pirouette, tossing a ring of dirt out around him. Cali shook her head. "I'm not hungry anymore." She sounded dazed. I think I'm going to puke." Sir Stiesel looked up at the canopy of leaves above them, then to Rolando. "There are more," he said. Rolando understood. He pulled his sword out of its cane scabbard and stuck the end into the ground, then took off between the trees, dragging it behind him. "Where's he going?" Serge asked Sir Stiesel. "Anywhere. Everywhere. Cut lines in the ground. Fast. In every direction." Serge obeyed. Cali called forth her giant agasate blade, set it behind her, and began to run as well. "Where should we go?" Serge shouted back over his shoulder. "Stay within earshot," Sir Stiesel yelled. "Make 3 left turns so you don't get too far." Again, Cali and Serge obeyed. Rolando heard the direction, though he was further away, and he made the same turns, but with more distance between them. Eventually, the knights came back within sight of one another, and Sir Stiesel raised a hand to stop them all. They stood in silence as he looked around, mostly up. The light filtering through the leaves had returned. "I think we got them, at least some of them." "What?" Cali asked. "What were they?" "Words," Rolando said. "Words?" Cali asked. "Wards," Serge explained, "like Batman and Alfred's ward, not ward. This did not help. "They're magical symbols," Sir Stiesel said. "You paint them on things, tattoo them on skin, hide them. The witch put them here, just under the leaves and roots. They tricked us into thinking we were lost, that the trees were moving, that we were starving to death, that the sun had gone down. I don't know what other enchantments may also be influencing us." Serge looked at Rolando. "Is there some kind of spell that would take away enchantment?" "Yeah, I used one. To save you, remember? But I can't remember how to say it." Rolando shook his head. "I don't remember you ever saving me from anything, my good squire," he told the no longer squire, and this distracted Serge from the question. "Hey, I'm not a—" "Wait," Cali said, putting her hands out to both sides like she was trying to tell the world to stop turning. "What about a finding spell? You used one to track the anhanas, right? Maybe you could find the wards in the ground, and then we could cut those up too." "Sure," Serge said. "I just need— Hey, what's her name? The little red—" Sir Stiesel couldn't remember Reckless Ken's name either, or the billy goat's species, or anything about his familiar's details. But he could see the absences of those details in his mind, the holes in the Swiss cheese, and they were growing. He looked up through the canopy and tried to get a sense of the position of the sun as best he could. Then he drove the tip of his sword into the ground. "Come with me. We have to get out of here, now. Leave a trail and maybe we'll break a ward or two as we go, but stay together. No matter how much you forget, even if you forget one another's names and why you're following them, remember to stay together. Come on." And he started running to the east, back toward the barrier of greenbriers. "Isn't this the wrong way?" Serge asked, huffing and puffing more than Sir Stiesel or Rolando because he lacked their permanent ability to speed himself up. Cali sounded about as out of breath when she said, "I wouldn't be able to forget why we're following each other back this way because I never knew. What's going on? Rolando, do you know why we're running this way?" "I think—" Rolando paused in his speech, though he kept jogging, and the pause wasn't from shortness of breath. He sounded as calm as ever while he ran, and Serge vaguely remembered Rolando speaking to him in this way when they sparred. Only Serge couldn't remember if they'd been practicing or if they'd truly fought, and the older man had lectured him in this calm tone during real combat. "I think," Rolando repeated,
I am forgetting things I should know, and Sir Steezel has deduced that we must escape this, or we will forget that we are forgetting. As to why we are running in this direction, perhaps he chose a direction at random. Or maybe we have been this way before, and we are returning to some safe place I do not recall.
Is this the way we came from? Serge said, now unsure. I don't remember this tree being in the way. Or those, Cali said, looking ahead to the wall of green briars. And then they heard the first cries coming from somewhere inside the hedge of thorny vines, somewhere slightly off to their left. There, Sir Steezel cried, cut through there, to those voices. But they sound weird, Cali said, like all croaky and scratchy and... Are those animals? But like talking in words? Serge asked. And what are they saying? Cali asked. Just do it, Sir Steezel said. Cut your way to those sounds. I don't know what they're yelling either, but they know. They'll tell us. Cali didn't cut the briars immediately, but listened. What's a Steezel? And I think one of them is screaming about Orlando. Like a Disney reference, maybe? And something about a surge protector?
I do not understand either, my lady, Rolando said. But let us trust this gentleman here. I am sorry, sir, I have forgotten your name. But you seem to know what you are doing, and I find I quite enjoy cutting through these vines. Come, my lady, you should try it. I apologize, I seem to have forgotten your name as well.
No offense taken, Cali said. It's nice to meet you. I'm not quite sure about my own name, come to think of it. And I can't really help you with the vines much because I only have this little pocket knife and... Oh, shit. She looked down at the giant horse-killer sword she dragged behind her. Well, that's convenient. I could use that, I guess. As the three men made smaller, careful cuts, aiming for individual vines, Cali raised up the huge blade over her head and brought it down in a massive swing, cutting deep into the briars. Look, she said, they're growing back. The gaping hole she'd created began to close, and the men realized their efforts would never amount to much if the individual vines were regrowing at the same speed.
Gentlemen, Rolando ordered, like this lady here, cut them all. We must cut faster than they grow.
The men launched in with the same overhead chops, and Cali went back to it, cleaving a path with Agasate. The four knights made their way within the wall of briars, heedless of the fact that it was closing up behind them. Inside, they discovered 3 balls of vines wrapped around 3 nearly indistinguishable figures. Cries, now too muffled to be words, emanated from within the balls of vines. What the fuck are those? Serge breathed, peering between the vines at the things underneath. Gross. I can see their bones. And they don't have heads. They have heads, Sir Steezel said, just no skulls. He held up his sword, then turned it over to find the skull of a billy goat attached to the pommel. But look, the skulls on our swords match. It's got to be a clue. Cali looked at her own sword. I don't have a skull on mine.
3 creatures and 3 skulls, Rolando said. I think this young man is correct.
Should we cut them out of those? Serge asked. We don't know what they are. Guys, Cali said. The vines behind them were growing closer, and their retreat into the woods was now completely blocked. Cut the vines back, Sir Steezel ordered. The 4 went to work on the vines all around them, creating a roughly circular area within the walls, and the vines around their familiars, appearing eerily like nests sitting on the ground between the 4 humans, hacking and slashing at the encroaching growth. We're losing, Serge said over his shoulder. When the first vines wrapped around Sir Steezel's ankle, he was surprised to find they caused him no pain. For a moment he stopped cutting to examine the vine wrapping its way around his leg. The green briars had wicked little thorns, but none of them were touching his skin. Then another wrapped around his right wrist. Again, it didn't hurt, but he had to yank his hand free. Once it was liberated, his left hand and both ankles were knotted in vines. I think I'm wearing some kind of invisible armor, he said. Rolando had already figured that out.
Yes, like a force field from a science fiction novel. Or a movie. Did you ever see Dune? Directed by David Lynch. 1982, I believe.
I saw both Dune movies, Serge said. I don't remember armor. Cali stopped swinging her sword. Did you know everybody pronounces Timothée Chalamet's name wrong? It's Timothée. I thought that was interesting.
God, that hurts.
Really? Serge asked. His voice sounded concerned, but in a distant, mildly curious way. One of the vines raked across Callie's arm, drawing blood, and another climbed up the side of one shin before curling around her ankle. "Son of a... I wish I had a force field like you guys," she said. All four of them heard a chorus of simultaneous clicks, then the clinking sound of metal on metal, and then a chime. "Oh, that's better," Callie said. Not only were the vines separated from her skin by the same invisible layer as the men's, but the spikes on her armor, invisible to all of them, kept the vines at an even greater distance and gave her more freedom of movement. As she turned on her heels and raised her sword for another swing, the spines on her arms and legs also clipped the nearby vines. "I can't move," Serge said.
"I am similarly constrained," Rolando said.
"Quick," Sir Steezel shouted to Callie. "Cut the nests." Callie brought her sword down in another huge arcing chop. "I can't exactly do surgery with this thing," she said.
"Just cut one in half," he yelled.
"But the thing inside is still alive," Callie said. "Do it, or we're all going to die." Though this order was delivered with ragged desperation, Callie didn't like being told what to do. She didn't know enough to argue, and didn't feel like waiting to see if it was correct. But she didn't like obeying. "Fine, but that seems a bit overly dramatic to me," she said, as she brought the sword down on one of the nests of vines, carving it in half. Gorman leapt out, rolled, and came up to a standing position, with both its front paws raised high in the air just above its ears. It looked right at Serge and said, "Fireball." Serge suddenly remembered the words. He'd spoken them toward the skull of the red panda attached to the hilt of his sword, Baganawatig, the name of which he suddenly remembered as well. Blue lightning danced around the blade of the sword, liberating it from the vines that held it, which turned into ash in its vicinity. But the more important freedom of movement came to his left hand. The ball of fire started small, scorching the vines around his wrists, and as the ball grew, the vines wrapping around his upper arm either retreated or were burned away. "What should I aim for?" he asked Gorman. The vines had quickly snagged the red panda's upraised arms and feet, like they would draw and quarter the creature, and then others had begun wrapping around its torso, neck, and face, but the muzzle was still free enough to reply, "The others! Poe and Ken!" Serge hesitated. The nests of vines were in between the four knights. A fireball might engulf them all. "Okay," he said, the words starting off uncertain, but gaining confidence as he stretched it out, then released the ball of fire, floating above the palm of his hand. The fire ballooned out, less like the result of a high explosive, more like a match tossed on a gas grill that had collected too much of its own fuel under the hood. For a second, all the knights squinted at the heat and light. Callie and Serge's helmets protected their heads effectively, but the skin around their eyes felt the burning. Sir Steezel and Lord Rolando each felt their hair catch fire, and the skin of their faces blister and crack. But when the older knights opened their eyes, Poe and reckless Ken stood before them completely freed of the vines. The knights leapt into action. Their full accumulated knowledge of battle magic returned to them. Rolando began hurling fireballs in every direction, in an increasingly wide circle around them. Sir Steezel cast a fire whip and carved the vines Rolando's spheres of fire missed. As though in a choreographed dance, the men circled the group, burning and whipping, then turning and casting healing spells on one another's charred faces, then back to their work, then around again, this time casting the disenchantment spell Serge had employed previously on both Callie and Serge. "Are we going to start a forest fire or something?" Callie asked. "No," Sir Steezel said, still whipping at the Greenbriers. "They're going to keep coming. We have to carve a path through again, this time with the familiars." Callie and Serge raised their swords and charged at the smoking vines to the west, back toward the forest they'd entered. This time Gorman rode on Serge's shoulder, and though the vines made some efforts to reach out and pull the red panda away, the sword crackled with electricity, and he defended her easily. Callie's giant blade slashed beyond the burnt edge, and back into the green vines. But this time Sir Steezel and Rolando aided with the fire whip and smaller, more controlled fireballs, which widened the space and kept the vines from regrowing. Other more distant vines made an effort, slithering through the burnt husks, but they couldn't reform the wall fast enough, and the knights, with their familiars, carved their tunnel back through and out into the darkened woods. This time, just on the edge of the forest, Sir Steezel, Rolando, and Serge cast finding spells, and quickly identified the wards. Just as Sir Steezel had guessed, they hid under a few inches of dirt. When the finding spells made them glow, the light came through the soft earth. Callie charged at each one and dragged Agasate across it. Once broken, the light of the finding spell made the ward flicker a few times, then go dark, as there was no longer an active ward there to be found. The forest, it turned out, was a minefield of these wards, a new one every 10 or 20 feet in each direction. None of the knights recognized the symbols, but the effects became apparent. When Cali would cut one, the trees around it would suddenly stop moving. Their movement before hadn't been visible, but the absence of the movement somehow became apparent, like a serene silence replacing an uncomfortable one. Other wards made the encroaching darkness disperse. Sir Steezel watched as the sunlight through the canopy seemed to skip, the sun beyond changing places, as wards which accelerated its speed across the sky were broken and it jumped back to its true location. Clever, he muttered. He looked at Reckless Ken. How long were we gone, would you guess? From when we left you in the hedge to when we came back. It happened really fast, the billy goat said. 1 minute we were walking along with you while Lord Rolando was carving the path, and then the vines grabbed us, and we were shouting to you, but you couldn't hear us, and you just kept going. We shouted for a few minutes, and then the vines completely encased us, and I could hear you come running back. He looked at Serge. And yes, we totally heard what you said about us. Sorry, Serge said. I couldn't remember ever having seen a ghost with transparent skin and visible skeleton before. Still, I shouldn't have called you gross. My bad. Reckless Ken nudged the young knight in the hip with its horns. I'm just messing with you, man. We do look kind of weird. How did the vines hold you guys? Cali asked. You can, float through walls and stuff. Yeah, it was scary, Reckless Ken said. It was like before, Gorman said. When I was in my grave and couldn't come out, the vines held us like that. Clever, Sir Steezel repeated. Her spells, they take our familiars, then take our sense of time, take our sense of direction, and then take our memories. They have to be sequenced. If we had our familiars, we'd just cast spells to get out. He looked to Reckless Ken. It felt like hours to us, and we were completely lost. We didn't know where we were, and then we didn't know who we were. And the ground ate my fudge, Cali told Gorman, so that was a bummer. Yeah, what was up with that part? Serge asked Sir Steezel. I get the other parts. Take away the magic, the sense of direction, of time, of memory. But why make us feel hungry and then take the food? Sir Steezel frowned and thought. Maybe those were two different things. The hunger could have been part of the same enchantment that made us think lots of time was passing. Or maybe some of these wards make us want to fight with one another? But the ground eating the fudge? That clued me into where the wards might be located. But that one doesn't make as much sense. Why eat the fudge? Rolando stopped suddenly, and the others followed. What? Serge asked. Sir Steezel is right. It is a separate spell. Take our magic, take our sense of time and direction, make us fight with one another, take our memories, and then... Off in the distance, they heard a low, unusual roar, not like a lion, but like 1,000 small rumbles beneath their feet, gentle in their vicinity, but louder far off. Destroy the evidence we were ever here, Rolando finished. Then he raised a finger in the universal sign of Eureka, unfolded the coat that was still draped over his arm despite the vine's attempt to rip it away from him, and fished in the interior pocket for a moment. He pulled out a ball of fabric that turned out to be a pair of socks, undid them, and tossed one of the thin, black European-style men's short socks onto the ground behind them. A fog rose up out of the ground and encompassed the sock, then began pulling it down into the dirt. Looked like roots last time, Serge said. That was the enchantment, Rolando explained. It's not roots. It's not really fog either. It's... Wait! He shouted. But it was too late. Serge had used Baganawatig to point at the fog, so the tip of his blade was too close for Rolando to leap between them and bat the younger knight's sword away. In disgust, Serge activated the electrical effect of his sword with a thought and gave the little patch of fog a small poke. Rays of electricity spread out into a 6-foot-wide area on the surface around the spot where the fog had appeared, then continued away under more dirt, sparking occasionally as they raced on, some still glinting 30 feet away. The ground heaved. Should we run again? Cali asked. Yes, that would be wise, Rolando said. The four of them, this time accompanied by their familiars, Gorman on Surge's shoulder, Poe in flight, and Reckless Ken bounding in large hops, took off through the woods. The ground shook beneath them.
"What is it?"
Surge shouted. "It's a slime," Sir Stiesel said, his voice eerily calm as he ran. "Think of it like a layer of mushrooms under the ground, only motile, and potentially very aggressive. And you shocked it."
"Sorry, I didn't know." "What did I say about keeping your sword sheathed?" Rolando asked.
"It was already out from the vines."
"It's a metaphor," Rolando yelled back, "which is also literal. But even when it's not literal, it is still a metaphor."
Surge looked back over his shoulder. A gout of green slime burst through a patch of ground behind him, then flowed in his direction, not fast enough to catch him, but coming his way. The leaves and small plants caught in it were digested, like they'd been consumed by a bag filled with acid. "Watch your feet," he yelled. Another large burst of slime, 4 feet high, 6 feet wide, and spreading, gurgled out of a hole under a tree near Cali. She dodged around it, closer than Surge liked. The slime ate away at the base of the tree until the trunk broke within the slime. The viscosity of the substance kept the tree from falling fast, but it leaned down over their path. The knights ducked under it, then leapt as another bubble of slime grew just beyond the falling trunk. Baganawatig, still in Surge's hand, crackled in the air. "Should I—"
"Don't antagonize it," Rolando said.
"There!" Cali cried. "The house!" They saw it. A cottage made of stone, with a thatched roof of yellow straw, tucked halfway under a low hill, with trees growing all around it, and one rooted firmly in one of the house's walls, the roots forming the doorway. They charged for the door. When they were 30 yards away, the ground beneath their feet ceased its rumbling. Surge risked a look back. The slime continued to follow them, but it hit some invisible barrier and began to climb upon itself, forming the beginning of a half-dome around the side of the house. He slowed slightly, feeling safer, and then the house's occupant stepped into her doorway, a wooden staff upraised in one hand, a trio of glowing fireballs orbiting one another over her other palm. "Stop right there," she ordered. They did, the 2 older knights halting on a dime, the younger 2 taking a few more steps, Poe landing on Rolando's shoulder, Gorman leaping off Surge's, and standing between him and the witch, arms upraised, frightened by the magic it could feel emanating from the woman. Harriet Galbraith looked just like Lady Ariel Honan's description. Her hair was long and dark brown with some shocks of gray. She had a tattoo of some symbol Surge didn't recognize in the middle of her forehead, and a pretty, slightly elfin face. She was 5.5 feet tall and wore a black robe that looked like something one might find at a college graduation ceremony. It mostly hid her figure, but revealed she was thin, especially in the hips. She had a distinct, clipped British accent, and her voice carried the smoky huskiness of someone who transitioned later in life and went through some voice training.
"We mean you no harm," Rolando said. "We have been sent to find you by the ladies and lords of the Great Lakes. I am Lord Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi of Barcelona. This is Sir Stiesel the Investigator. Dame Cali the Lion-Hearted of Santa Leon, protector of the underestimated, and Sir Sanchez of the town of Eels, defender of justice and protector of maidens and mermaidens."
Harriet made an explosive scoff.
"Well, that's a mouthful, isn't it? I'm Harrietta, a witch who wants to be left alone. So why would the ladies and lords of the lakes send the likes of you to find me in my woods?"
"We're looking for the wizard Fenkum," Surge said. "But we're not powerful enough to find him with our own magic, so they said we needed a witch who was as powerful as he is to break through his hiding spells with your finding spells." Harriet pursed her lips, then moved them from side to side as she thought, making her nose twitch. Sounds reasonable. All right, you there. Umbridge, off with you then, and go back to sleep." The knights turned to see the slime slowly descend from its spot piled up against the barrier around the house, first sliding down like liquid, then turning to fog at its edges and slipping back into the ground. "I named the slime after someone I knew back in school," Marietta said, "but the slime is preferable. Come in. Tell me about this quest of yours." The knights took a second to put their swords away, then followed the witch into her cottage. Inside they found a cozy single room with a stone fireplace. The walls were nearly covered in shelves, built directly into the brick walls, and these were laden with jars of various sizes, some made of pottery, others glass, revealing strange, solid objects suspended in fluid of different colors. A heavy cauldron hung from chains over the glowing coals. "I was just making myself some stew, if you'd like some," Henrietta said. No offense, but you just tried to kill us like 3 or 4 times in the last 20 minutes/5 hours, Sir Stiesel said. "So you'll forgive me if I'm a bit hesitant." Henrietta stirred the stew with a wooden ladle. "Oh, that. I have to have fairly robust security measures in place. Frankly, you aren't supposed to be here. Far more powerful wizards have been eaten by my forest before." "Why all the security?" Cali asked. "My dear, you of all people might understand best. I was once something of a rock star in the wizarding world, a bit famous, if I do say so myself. Then I decided to transition." She raised the ladle and took a little sip of the broth, made a sour face at the cold, and dropped the ladle back into the pot. "Wizards and witches, despite our considerable power, see ourselves as an embattled minority. And, as is often the case, sometimes people who face one kind of oppression turn around and find an even smaller group and direct all their ire at them, like ethnic minorities against even smaller immigrant populations. Or, in my case, wizards and witches feeling attacked by the world and turning around and attacking trans wizards and witches. We're a much smaller group. There are how many people in the wizarding community? Just a handful, really. And of those, how many are trans? Maybe 1%? But they have decided they need to protect their very clear," she made a chopping motion with the edge of her hand, "boundaries between witches and wizards, by killing anyone who dares to transition." "Holy shit, that's terrible," Cali said. "Well, my country, especially England, has become Turf Island. Very embarrassing. Trans people are attacked all over the world, but England? There our very existence is considered a polite topic of debate. Only not in the wizarding community. Wizards are taught that they will not be able to be real men if there are trans men around, and witches think we're going to attack them and make them less witches or something. So when they see us, they just—" She pointed a finger and made a buzzing noise. "And some of the more extreme ones hunt us down. So I came here." She looked at Sir Stiesel, then Lord Rolando, and answered the question neither had asked, nor would have ever asked aloud. "Of course I could have cast a glamour to make myself look and sound like a cis woman. That would have been easy. And I don't blame the witches and wizards who make that choice. But my mentor taught me that the whole point of, well, of everything, really, was to learn to truly be myself. And I'm a trans woman, not a cis woman. So I transitioned and chose to look like it." "Hence the tattoo?" Cali asked. "That's badass, by the way." And then Serge recognized the symbol. The circle sat in the middle of her forehead, and a small plus sign came down just between her eyebrows. Out of the upper corners of the circle, pointing diagonally into her hairline, a single arrow pointed to her left, and an arrow with a bar through its central arm pointed up to Harriet's right. "Well, thank you, but really it's covering a scar. Childhood accident, birthmark sort of thing. I was always self-conscious about it, so I got this over it. It functions as a kind of ward, warning me when certain people mean to do me harm. It didn't go off when you lot arrived, so I felt fairly safe allowing you to enter my home." She sat down at the table and motioned for them to join her. There were only 3 chairs, so Dame Cali and Lord Orlando sat, Sir Sanchez and Sir Stiesel standing behind them. "So tell me, this wizard, what was his name? Fenkum?" "Yes, Fenkum, and that's almost all we have to go on," Serge said. "He is the one responsible for the curse on this country," Rolando said. "We don't know that for sure," Sir Stiesel said, "but that's what we've been told. And it seems he's captured some of Lady Ariel Honan's Anhanas." "And he's working with a pack of swinemen," Serge said. "We think," Sir Stiesel amended. "That's not proven yet either." Rolando did not appreciate Sir Stiesel's skepticism. He turned back in his chair and told the younger knight, "It is the best theory we have currently, and there is no evidence against it at this time." Then he swiveled back to Henrietta. "When I cast finding spells at the locations of the disappearances of the Anhanas, the trails would only go so far, and then they would disappear. Just come to an abrupt end. We need the help of someone able to cast a spell so powerful it will track him all the way back to his lair." "This curse you talked about, which one do you mean?" "The one that makes all the people in this country so numb to the conditions in their own land," Rolando said.
and may also prevent them from resting when they are dead. We are not sure which is the cause and which is the effect, or if the relationship is more complicated. But you must have noticed this curse, yes? Of course. It makes it quite easy to find spirits for familiars, doesn't it? Speaking of which, she aimed a stare at Cali, we need to get you a familiar, dear, don't we? Not fair that the men have all of them and you do not. Oh, it's not because of that, Sir Stiesel said, sounding a bit defensive. She just became a knight the other day. Well, the time has come then, Henrietta said. As I said, it's very easy to find restless spirits here in this country. Have you given any thought to the kind of form you would like your familiar to take? Callie made a consternated face. Well, I can live in the water and on land, but I don't want a frog. Something amphibious and potentially intimidating? I don't know. I have just the thing, Henrietta said. She held up a hand in a beer me gesture, and one of the jars flew off the shelf and slapped into the meat of her palm with a clap. And any specifics about the spirit? Race, gender, age? Callie made a quick shake of her head. I don't want to discriminate. This is one of those times where we don't pretend we don't all have our biases, dear. Pretending does nothing to address them. Acknowledge them, so you can be aware of them. Well, I suppose I would feel more comfortable with a woman, and for parody, because we have a couple of men turned into familiars. Age? Henrietta asked. Not too old or too young, I guess. Race? Nationality? I guess someone from around here, Midwest, like me. I don't care about the race as long as they don't care about mine. Well, they won't have any choice about that, dear. This is a familiar. They're bound to serve you. Rolando leaned over and whispered something into Callie's ear. Her eyes went wide for a moment. Yeah, one more thing. I'd like this to be voluntary. Voluntary? Henrietta asked. Like we ask the person if they want the job, and if they say no, we don't make them. Henrietta shrugged. All right, suit yourself. Then she reached into her pocket, cupped something gently, and scooped it out onto the table. It was a small, glowing mouse, its fur transparent, its tiny skeleton visible, and lacking a skull. This is my familiar. Its name is Catherine, but I call it Cat for short, because I think that's funny. And now that you mention it, I never asked Catherine if she wanted to do the job before I made her into this mouse. Maybe I should have. Didn't even consider it. She looked down at the mouse. What do you think, Cat? Do you want the job? Cat's voice was difficult to hear and very high-pitched, but the response came out in a similar clipped proper British accent to Henrietta's. You know, ma'am, I suppose I do. I've been in your service so long now, I wouldn't know what to do with myself otherwise. Moulder in a grave would be the other alternative, Henrietta told the mouse. Doesn't sound like much fun to me, but to each their own. Not like we get out much, ma'am. I suggest we help these people just for a change of scenery. Noted, Henrietta said. She looked up at Callie across the table. It's right, we don't get out much. All right then, let's call a spirit. Don't we have to, go to a graveyard? Oh, I'm a fair bit stronger than a warrior mage, you'll find. I don't have a sword and a pledge to serve some bloke who's never heard of me, but I can do some things you lot can't. She held out her hand again, and this time her staff flew to it. For the first time, they all noticed the very small mouse skull embedded in the carving at the top. Henrietta planted the base of the staff on the ground and swirled the top around in a small circle. Cat's mouse skull started to glow, and then the light turned into a tracer, then a constant ring. The space inside the ring turned into a dark disk, a hole in the air like the kind Wile E. Coyote could purchase from Acme, delivered in wooden crates, then slap on the side of a mesa to create tunnels. From out of this hole in space, a vaporous something emerged. As it did so, Henrietta took the jar she'd summoned from the shelf, shook it like a cupful of dice, and spilled it out onto the table in front of them. Callie didn't recognize the bones at first, except the near uniformity of their shape. Then they lined up, forming a rough circle, and she saw what they made. Take the skull, Henrietta said. You'll need that. You can put it in your pocket for now. I'll affix it to your sword later if that's where you want it. Seems to be the place where all you knights-errant carry yours. What all the cool kids are doing, as they say. The spirit flowed like smoke on water over the lip of the hole in the air, then drifted down to the table. Hey, Ghosty, what's your name? Henrietta asked. Something about her voice echoed strangely, a commanding tone created by multiple identical voices speaking at once. Who, me? The woman's voice said.
Henrietta rolled her eyes.
Yes, you, dear. What's your name?
I'm Mabel.
It's nice to meet you, Mabel. This is Dame Cali the Lion-Hearted of Santa Leone, protector of the underestimated. She's a knight-errant. Do you know what that means?
No, not really, the voice from the smoke said.
They're like heroes who go gallivanting around helping people.
Oh, the ghost said. That's nice of them.
Awfully nice, isn't it? Well, Dame Cali here wants to know if you'd like to work for her.
Oh, I've never had a job, Mabel said sadly. I was a stay-at-home mom until my kids were grown, and then just a housewife until Roger retired from his job at the plant. I did some volunteering so I could help with those kinds of things.
Oh, we'd make sure you have all the training you require, and we think you'll be perfectly suited to it. Dame Cali just wants to make sure you want to do it. She doesn't want you to be forced into anything against your will.
Well, gee, I don't know. I mean, without knowing what the job is, I wouldn't want to do it if I wouldn't be good at it.
I promise you'll be positively ace at it. Just brilliant. Or you could go back to the grave. Up to you.
Cali looked at Rolando, frowning at this obvious coercion, but said nothing. Mabel said. You know, I thought I'd get some company when Roger died, but they put him right next to me, and we haven't been able to say a word to each other for all these years. I got the cancer. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Breast cancer. Then her voice returned to normal. Roger must have lived for a long time after that, or it felt like a long time to me, and then I could tell he was there, and that was better. And then it just felt even more lonely because we couldn't talk anymore. So yeah, you know what? I think I should take a job out of the house, just so I can meet some people, you know? I think that's a good idea.
Great, Henrietta drawled. And then she sent Mabel into the bones. The skin formed around the spine, and Cali could see the whole animal clearly, even though its skull was missing.
Hello, Mabel, Cali said. I'm Cali. I guess I'm, like, your boss now? It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Cali. A woman boss. That's very forward-thinking, it said. Also, swung its head to examine itself, then looked up at Cali. I think I'm a snake.
A sea crate, to be specific, Henrietta said. Amphibious snakes. Do you swim, Mabel?
Not very often, but I took lessons when I was young, and I like taking the kids to the pool.
Great, Henrietta repeated. Well, you're an excellent swimmer now. Which is good, because your boss is part mermaid and part selkie. Ever heard of a selkie?
The snake swung its head from side to side.
They're part seal, part person. Just lovely. For now, just stay close to Cali, and she'll let you know what to do.
I will? Cali asked.
Do you have a grimoire? Henrietta asked.
Yeah, I started one. She pulled the notebook out of her pocket. Henrietta stopped rotating her staff, tapped the head of it against the top of the book, and spoke some words as she directed an arch of light to Cali's forehead. There you go. You've memorized them all. Hey, could I? Serge asked, pulling his out of his duffel bag. I'm new too.
But of course,
Henrietta said, casting the same spell. Cali and Serge blinked, assessing their memories, and found they knew how to say every spell they'd written down.
Oh, and you'll need these knights' speed and reflexes too, won't you?
She picked up Cat from the table and spoke directly to the mouse.
This one's a bit of a doozy. Ready?
Always, ma'am. Henrietta spoke the words, then slumped a bit in her chair, winded. Both Cali and Serge found they could decelerate the way they experienced time, just as Lord Rolando and Sir Steezel could, turning the ability off and on at will.
Well, that's simply not fair, Rolando said, a smile in his voice. It took me weeks, almost a month, to cast that spell on myself, and she does it in seconds.
He glared at Henrietta, though with a twinkle in his eye.
How will they ever learn to appreciate their gifts if they do not have to earn them?
Oh, I don't know, Lord Rolando, Henrietta said, laughing.
How would anyone ever be able to appreciate their gifts if they didn't have to earn them?
Boom, Serge called. Mic drop on the noble in the house. Rolando wagged a finger at the witch.
You have me there. Well, I suppose we don't have much time, so I'm attempting to hurry things along. Let's get going, shall we?
She rose and looked around.
Where's my purse?
Cali pointed at the small clutch hanging on the nail by the door.
No, that one's just for day trips. I think we may need more supplies than that.
She opened the trunk at the foot of the small, single bed in the corner of the room, pulled some clothes out, and Columbused the bag right where she'd left it.
There it is.
She spoke a series of spells into her staff, stringing them together as though they were a single sentence, though they were made up of different languages. The knights looked around, frightened, as the jars on the walls began to teeter, their rims knocking on the wood, creating the impression the whole house might fall down. Then the jars leapt off their shelves, swirling so they didn't hit any of the room's occupants, except the familiars, which they passed through. The clothing flew out of the trunk and followed the jars. The stew in the cauldron siphoned up in a smooth stream, curved in the air, and landed in a Tupperware container without spilling a drop. The Tupperware fell back into the cauldron with a clunk, and then the whole cauldron lifted off its chains and jumped into Harrietta's bag, too. "In case I get peckish," she said. "All right, we're off." "To where?" Serge asked, eagerly, not sarcastically. "Do you know where Fenkham is?" He fully expected her to rattle off the zip code or the longitude and latitude. "I do not," she said, and nodded her head decisively. "But I know who to ask, and I know how to make them tell me. Have you ever been to New Orleans? I think you're going to enjoy it immensely." Harrietta stomped out of her house, the knights and their now 4 familiars in tow. Mabel had looped itself once over Callie's shoulder, then again around her neck, and had swung its face out in front of her, flicking its tongue before saying, "I don't really understand anything that's happening here, but I think a jar with a brain inside just flew through my snake body. I never bothered Roger about his job at the factory, but I'm sure it wasn't as exciting as this one. This is all very confusing." She said this last sentence as though confusion were the most wonderful emotion she'd ever experienced. "I'll do my best to explain on the way," Callie whispered. Well, the knights, familiars, and witch walked back through the woods to the trail that would lead them to the port, the ferry, the rental car, and the airport in Detroit. Benjamin sat in his apartment, making one of the great modern blunders. He'd been raised to believe the classic blunders were never get involved in a land war in Asia, and never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. The second had proved incorrect moments after he'd learned it, but the first had been reinforced by every history class he'd ever taken. Since then, he'd come to think of these as classic in the same way there were wonders of the classical world and wonders of the modern world. And if the modern world held any great blunder, it was this: never read the comments. Yet while the magical characters wandered across Mackinac Island, he did exactly what he knew he should not do. He justified this by telling himself his interactions with the commenters would help him make some connections with the people interested in the newest video he'd made about the ongoing battle with Megacorp. The vast majority of the comments were supportive. But as Benjamin constantly reminded others, and failed miserably at reminding himself, the human brain is just not constructed to weigh support and criticism equally. Early humans lived in small communities of 30 to 60 people, and without those communities, they would die. Thus, while reminders they were loved members of the group were doubtless appreciated, they didn't pose the same kind of existential danger as a single individual even hinting they wanted a person to be expelled. That kind of signal left early humans feeling the same kind of terror as a confrontation with a saber-toothed tiger, because from an evolutionary perspective, it had the same potential consequences. The person would die. The genes wouldn't be passed down. Every single ancestor who managed to successfully pass on their genetic makeup understood expulsion from the group was deadly. And for almost all of the next million years, humans honed that knowledge, living comfortably, if tenuously, within their communities, or dying alone. And suddenly, far too fast for evolution to adjust, humans began to be confronted by numbers of humans so vast their little brains couldn't possibly cope. So when some of those humans demanded the expulsion of another, every human reacted, at least on a chemical level, just like their ancestors, snapping into fight, flight, or freeze as though they were in lethal danger, when in fact the human on the other end would never know them, never pose a threat to them, and might not even be real. In the early days of Facebook, Benjamin had engaged in long debates, sometimes with people he knew, sometimes with total strangers. He told himself there was value to these, because these debates honed his thinking on issues, brought him new information from outside his media bubble, and exposed readers to ideas they might not otherwise come across, even if the direct interlocutor would never change their mind on an issue or even debate in good faith. But even then, he found these arguments exhausting, and his family saw the toll these interactions had on him, leaving him jittery and wrung out for hours, even days later. He'd learned over the years to either ask people directly if they were open to changing their minds about something before engaging in a long discussion, or to limit himself to a single reply to see whether the person had any intention of participating in a serious way. But in the wake of Megacorp's theft of the store Benjamin had owned with Chris, The number of people he heard from had increased exponentially. Now, just tapping the like button to thank people for engaging with a video could take hours. And he had to read the comments before liking in order to make sure he wasn't communicating approval of something unclear, asinine, or truly monstrous. And among these, the unclear, asinine, and occasionally monstrous, a through line seemed to be that he should not make his confrontation with Megacorp, quote, political, unquote. He'd written extensively on the way this aversion to politics was itself a capitulation to a certain kind of politics. As he frequently reminded students, claiming something was political didn't mean much unless one defined the term. Did the person mean partisan politics at the national level? Why should that be the only kind of politics which couldn't be discussed? Did they include a broader definition of politics? Benjamin held that politics was merely the distribution of power among people. Otherwise, what would phrases like family politics or office politics mean? And just as romantic relationships, family dynamics, and every workplace org chart contain distinct and nuanced distributions of power, any interaction involving a human being, even a single individual in isolation interacting with the natural world, had political ramifications. The example he always used with students: imagine you have a date on Friday and you need to ask to use the car. Who do you ask? In some households, a child would have to ask their father. In some households, they would be more likely to get a yes asking their mother. In some, they would ask grandma. In others, their other dad, or their foster parent. In some households, this might lead to a family discussion. In others, it might be a quick yes or no with no opportunity for an appeal. All of this is politics. Of course, the people in the comments criticizing him for his politics were not talking about the way he thought a family should operate, or a business, or a romantic relationship. They wanted him to limit his criticisms to Megacorp, a corporation which they agreed had mistreated its franchisee and customers. But obviously, this too is political. Benjamin wondered how these commenters could fail to see they were voicing support for the criticism of a corporation on behalf of their fellow working-class people, and not see the way that mirrored other criticisms of corporations and issues of worker solidarity. No, he didn't really wonder. He understood it all too well. They'd been gaslit, duped into thinking certain kinds of politics, racial identity politics, gender politics, relationship politics, family politics, were permitted topics of discussion. Others had to be whispered in hushed voices, criticisms of employers or authorities in religious institutions, and some were simply not allowed, criticisms of their own partisan political teams by those they saw as outsiders, like a sibling who can talk smack about their brother or sister but won't allow anyone else to do it. Had these commenters pegged Benjamin as someone on their side, they would have allowed him to criticize the system, the political leadership, even their own most hallowed dogmas and icons. But once they decided he was other, he was no longer allowed to associate the struggle against a corporation with similar struggles, or with those who consistently threw their political power behind corporations and against workers. And Benjamin knew he would never be able to point out this hypocrisy. As one of his defenders in the comments wrote, far more succinctly and elegantly than he'd ever managed, questions of politics can't be separated from questions of justice. And yet, they clearly could. They shouldn't be. But every single American, perhaps more so than anyone else on Earth in a unipolar world with a single superpower, inhabited their own hypocrisy to a degree never seen before in history. Sure, there had been other colonial powers who had participated in horrors, and all the citizens of those nations had to live with the reality that they benefited from those horrors whether they wanted to or not. But it was uniquely American to simultaneously stand on stolen ground and enjoy a standard of living produced by an economy rooted in slavery and misogyny, and pay the taxes that bought the bullets police officers shot into black men's backs, and the bombs dropped on children around the world, all while fueling the environmental devastation that would, if unchecked, make the entire planet uninhabitable for human beings. Lots of countries did some of those things, but only Americans had to live with them all, and all at once. Regardless of their votes or the stocks in their 401ks or their willingness or unwillingness to voice support for any particular public policy, every single American participated, whether they were awake or asleep, day in and day out, from the moment they were born until their last breath. So while questions of politics shouldn't be separated from questions of justice, of course Americans like to pick and choose when they cared about politics and when they cared about justice. They couldn't care about both all the time, or they'd be broken by the weight of the injustice and their political responsibility for it. Some, like the commenters, just wanted a good story about the little guy taking down a big corporation, and they didn't want to have to think about the ways that connected to anything else. Because of course they didn't. They couldn't take it. The very notion of being awake and aware of the world, especially if this consciousness was labeled in African American vernacular English, made them roll their eyes or panic or explode in a rage, anything to avoid the burden of confronting their own culpability. And Benjamin was no exception. He paid his taxes, used the roads, burned gas in his car, and made choices to skip past horrific videos of American bombs falling on civilians in foreign lands because he just couldn't take it some days. Over the course of his life, starting at a very young age, he'd done everything he could think of to push back on injustices in his country. Even before he could vote, which is vital and is also the least anyone can do. He'd marched and protested, he'd taught for more than 20 years, and though he'd always been careful to be nonpartisan, seeing it as unethical to encourage any kind of partisan voting to a captive audience, he'd always created his curriculum and classroom environment with an eye for safety, justice, and equity, the values he hoped his students would take with them into the world to create the best society for them to live in. He'd lobbied, testified at his state capitol, organized with his union and with other not-for-profits. He wrote and wrote and wrote. And when he couldn't take it anymore, couldn't live with his own hypocrisy, and next to neighbors who, at least according to their flags and votes, wanted to erase his trans kid, make his wife into a piece of property, deport his students, and imprison him for writing books which they deemed obscene just for including people from all walks of life, Benjamin decided his last act of protest would be to reject it all, to take the advice of every commenter who told his lizard brain that he was expelled from the group, to leave the country entirely. And then, for many reasons, chief among them the theft of his store by a corporation, he had to come back to beg for a couch to sleep on because he couldn't keep a roof over his head abroad. And now those commenters wanted to tell him that the theft of the store shouldn't be political. It was the culmination of a lifetime of political failure. He knew many of them wanted it to be nothing more than entertainment, but he couldn't understand why any of them would expect him to simply obey them when they said his real life shouldn't be described in context. Benjamin knew better than to expect consistency, empathy, or even decency in the comments. Some of the people were just trolls looking to vent or seeking approval from their own little communities. Some might have been bots or even paid agents tasked by Megacorp. And everyone, Benjamin tried to remind himself, was doing the best they could, with the knowledge and skills they possessed, within circumstances no one else could fully understand. In a special layer of hypocrisy, Benjamin didn't respect himself very much, so he knew it was unfair to expect it from others. He was wrapped up in this tight ball of contained fury, anxiety, hopelessness, and self-recrimination when he got a notification. An email from their attorney had dropped into his inbox. He opened it and breathed a sigh of relief so deep he felt he might turn into a fully liquid form and dribble out into a puddle on the floor. The email was a single line long, referencing the attached documents. "We'll drop these bombs this week," it said. "It will be glorious." If you're excited about this project, please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcasting app you're on now. And if you're willing to support me as I craft this novel in serial form, please consider becoming a member of my Substack or Patreon. Thanks to my newest Substack subscribers, Ezekiel Berman, Baker Cordell, Jason, Brian Westby, and Brian Slack. And thanks to the 12,401 of you who now subscribe to my channel on YouTube. I like to give shout-outs to fellow creators, so if you're a Patreon patron or Substack member or a YouTube subscriber and you have a book or some other project for me to plug, please email NotAPipePublishing at NotAPipePublishing@gmail.com, and I'll mention it here on the show. Speaking of which, I mentioned this episode's sponsor, but I didn't tell you anything about Duncan Wilson's book, 24 Seconds. In this collection of short stories, James Tyler of the Rochesters, by marriage only, is going about his business when he is kidnapped and taken to a designated purge zone to be held for ransom. Little do the gangsters know, the other Rochesters would rather see James dead so they can designate which purge zones live up to their names. Will James convince his kidnappers and escape certain doom at the hands of his in-laws? Find out in 24 seconds. There's a link to that book in the show notes. I will see you back here for Chapter 26 of Brick by Brick. Teaser. We don't know how Megacorp will respond to this week's revelations, but maybe a witch can force the ghost of a voodoo priestess to spill the beans about the connection between the evil wizard Fenkum and the companies he operates.